It is Friday, August 12th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to episode 14 of our Team Insider series. I'm your host, Matt Schaff. With me, as always, is Jared Smolin. Joining us today is Cowboys reporter for the Dallas Morning News, Michael Gehlken. Michael, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We got some questions for you because this Cowboys offense is controversial, but I guess as a Cowboys writer, you're probably used to some controversy around the team, even if it's kind of this fabricated stuff from fantasy folks.
No comment.
How has, first of all, Ezekiel Elliott looked in camp now that we all know that PCL injury was part of last season? How has he looked this year? Any different from during last season?
You know, I've wanted to cross-check it with a coach or two just to see if my eyes match up the film when the coaches get a chance to evaluate practice. But I thought the final two padded practices that the Cowboys had in Oxnard were his best practices, which is a good thing. If he's continuing to get stronger as the season nears, that's what you want. I think overall, Ezekiel has been very impressive in Cowboys training camp. They've been very mindful of, really as best as they can. There was a period where they only had 3 running backs available, but overall being mindful of his workload. You see a lot of, Tony Pollard and some of these younger backs, Rico Dowdle, a couple undrafted rookies. They're mixing these guys in a lot, so they're not, just getting all this unneeded wear and tear on Ezekiel Elliott in August. They're keeping the season in mind. But I think when you look at not only how he's looked in practice, the fact he's practiced every single day, but the way that the Cowboys are talking about Tony Pollard's usage, it's very clear that Ezekiel Elliott is a big part of this offense.
Is Zeke still showing off his abs as much as usual, or is he trying to hide them more as he gets older like the rest of us?
I don't think I've seen a Zeke abdominal muscle all summer, so I don't know. But I would not read into that.
All right. Well, I might have to decide after the show just how I'm going to analyze that portion of it. But you mentioned Tony Pollard, and of course, he's the guy that fantasy owners all over the place have been waiting for to explode. Has his usage in this camp looked significantly different than it did either heading into last season or during last season?
Well, no, but that is not reason to be concerned. So the Cowboys have taken a real, all right, let's roll up our sleeves and figure this out approach to Tony Pollard's usage. In week 17 last year against the Cardinals, a pivotal game for Dallas, they lost, and Tony Pollard had 6 touches. After they rested him in the week 18 game against the Eagles, they had their first round playoff game against the 49ers. Tony Pollard, 6 touches, another Cowboys loss. That was the note on which they entered the offseason. They understood that they needed to do a better job as a staff of involving Tony Pollard, not just mixing him in terms of running back carries, but really finding creative ways to get he and Ezekiel Elliott on the field at the same time. We've had, and I just reported this the other day, Kyle Valero is an offensive assistant on the Cowboys coaching staff. He is the private tutor to Tony Pollard at getting them up to speed, different aspects of the route tree, different aspects of understanding the why to the passing game, to get him antiquated and transitioning to more of a slot wide receiver role. Now, it's not his primary position. It's not something people should get carried away over. Tony Pollard is still in the running back meetings. He's still working with Skip Pete and all that. But these sessions have been pretty consistent between meetings for the Cowboys. So they're making a real emphasis. You're probably going to see more 21 personnel than you have in the past, where Tony Pollard and Ezekiel are on the field at the same time, and not just Tony Pollard having a more expansive route tree from the slot, but also do some things in terms of jet motion, some misdirection, really testing defenses laterally as well as vertically. And so this is different. I know people have heard it before where the Cowboys talk about, we need to involve Tony Pollard. We need to involve Tony Pollard. Right now, this is different. And so we'll see exactly how it goes. And it's lastly worth noting, Cowboys wide receiver position has some questions. So by moving Tony Pollard situationally into a slot role, it also kind of lightens the maybe command that you're asking of a very young wide receiver core.
Michael, I'm not sure how deep you are in with fantasy football people, but all we do is get carried away. We're basically hot air balloons, and partial reports are our fuel.
If I was not an NFL reporter, I would be a fantasy football writer or fantasy baseball, probably some combination of it. So you can PPR and in ADP me all day. I'm right there with you. So I can speak the language, and I definitely am aware of the application of Tony Pollard's usage to fantasy league, certainly in PPR leagues. So I think if you're wondering if this is all just smoke or if you should elevate him in your pre-draft rankings, I would say you should go ahead and elevate him if the format provides in terms of rewarding receptions. I do think Tony Pollard is going to see a little bit more there. But it's not just receptions; it could be touches as well with some of the running aspects that the Cowboys can do.
Jared didn't need a nudge in that direction, so we'll see how this one goes.
He's already up there for us. You alluded to the wide receiver situation there. There's a lot of questions. Let's start with Michael Gallup. How is he progressing from the Acl injury last year? And then I think he's basically said he's not going to be there for week 1. What's your best guess for when Gallup will debut this season?
I would think I wouldn't want to give you an exact week, but to me, it seems more likely than not that he starts the season on the physically unable to perform list, which would require him to miss the first 4 games of the regular season, at which point he's eligible to be activated at any point thereafter. But I think that is probably likely. This based on my impression. I saw a report that Gallup would be upset if he was to start the season on PUP. Based on my private conversations, that's not correct. So he understands that, it's a process to come back from February ACL surgery. It wasn't just the ACL, it was the MCL that he damaged on January 2nd game when scoring a touchdown. So it's a process, and he's engaged in that process, and he's come a long way on the rehab field with Cowboys Director of Rehabilitation, Britt Brown, clearly making some strides in the type of work and cuts that he's doing. But, we're talking right now, it's around mid-August, and, September 11th, start of the season is coming. And, even if he's making progress, this is still someone who hasn't practiced since January, hasn't worn pads since January. And so I think it's fair to expect him to kind of come into the fold, closer as we get into October.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he didn't have his surgery until early February, correct? He had to wait a few weeks.
Yeah, there was some swelling with the MCL. It just is common where you wait a little bit, but the wait was a little bit longer than I think people sometimes associate with ACL tears. But by waiting for the procedure, it really eased the process post-op. And so the rehab has gone really well, and it probably wouldn't be going this well if they just jumped into surgery, a week or two after the tear.
So no Michael Gallup for the start of the season. I think James Washington's probably doubtful for the start of the season. Who do you think is going to be this team's second and third wide receivers? I guess besides Tony Pollard.
Right. Well, yeah, I would say, I would even put Pollard in that conversation, because I really want to be. Let's wait and see exactly what they want to do with this personnel grouping. But CeeDee Lamb obviously is established one, so we don't need to talk about him. I think Noah Brown, first name to me that comes to mind. You look at the wide receivers that the Cowboys have. Other than CeeDee Lamb, the only one who's ever caught a pass in a game from Dak Prescott is Noah Brown. And that chemistry, he's had a really strong camp. He's lighter. He's just been fairly consistent. So I would say he comes to mind. The rookie third-round pick, Jalen Tolbert, does as well. He can really stretch the field. He can go up and get it. A lot of 50-50 balls that seem to just kind of fall his way based on the way he tacks the ball in the air. A lot of deep over routes. And so I just don't know if I was in a PPR league, I'm not sure about his volume. I'd have questions and concerns going into it. I'd probably leave him in free agency unless I'm in a really, really deep league. And even then, probably not someone I would exactly target right now based on what we've seen without the preseason. So Noah Brown is probably where my attention goes first if I'm looking at the Cowboys wide receiver position. And then, I'd probably keep my eye on a guy like Simi Fehoko, a 2021 fifth-round pick out of Stanford. Really didn't do anything as a rookie. In training camp, you're kind of looking for him. But he just jumps out here in this summer where, his size, his speed, although working mostly with the twos, has been someone who's been one of the Cowboys' most improved players.
I liked Fehoko coming out of Stanford, so I'm happy to hear that. And it's interesting your point on Tolbert, because he's the guy fantasy drafters are flocking to, is like, the guy you're going to want for the start of the season. So it sounds like Noah Brown could be the super deep sleeper. How about the Cowboys offensive line? They lost La'el Collins and Connor Williams this offseason. Do you see that unit taking a step back and it being an issue at all for this offense?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I think depth is a concern. What does it look like? If one of the tackles go down, it could be a real problem. The youth at left guard between Connor McGovern, who's seen a lot of the first team reps, and then the guy who I expect ultimately to win the job is Tyler Smith, Cowboys first round draft pick. They drafted him understanding as a former tackle out of Tulsa, whose technique was very raw, whose penalty count was extremely high. A lot of that was just because of aggression, but still, he technically was really, really a raw player. And so they're giving him a chance to compete, and I expect he'll win that competition. He's so physical. He's very athletic. I think the run game should be strong in terms of blocking from the get-go. So I don't worry about it as much then. It's more about protection and how this offensive line can kind of hold up at different points. But I think overall it's a solid unit, not the elite unit that the Cowboys used to have in 18, 17, and around that era. But there's some upside, but some concern as you kind of look at the lack of depth and some of the inexperience.
I think that Noah Brown tip is exactly why we're doing these shows, Jared. That's because nobody is on Noah Brown, and lots of people like Jalen Tolbert. So I appreciate that. And Michael, I appreciate you spraying some cold water at Jared when he wanted to make Tony Pollard the number 2 wide receiver on this team.
That was a joke. It was a joke.
Now, though, I'm going to throw one more abbreviation at you because you talked PPR and ADP, but now it's time for IDP because I got a couple of defensive questions, and I want to know first, which edge player, aside from DeMarcus Lawrence, of course, do you expect to see the most playing time for this Cowboys defense?
And so just to be clear, because this player is situationally an edge, we're not talking about Micah Parsons, correct?
Right, not Micah Parsons.
Okay. And so you get the right side of the offensive or right side of the defensive line opposite DeMarcus Lawrence. You have Dante Fowler, you have Dorrance Armstrong, you have rookie second-round pick Sam Williams. Those are your options, from which I would choose Dante Fowler. He's someone who I imagine his analytic type stats in terms of his pressures, unless his sacks will probably show up. But if I'm having to pick, I would go him. He's someone who's at least got a 10-sack season under his belt. He's had a good camp. He was really active on Thursday in the Cowboys joint practice against the Denver Broncos. He's someone who's familiar with Dan Quinn, and Dan Quinn's familiar with him. And so in terms of keeping him multiple, keeping him on the move, I think Dante Fowler would be if you're intent on investing on a Cowboys edge who's not DeMarcus Lawrence, I would go Dante Fowler.
I'm glad you brought up Sam Williams because I was going to ask you about him too. Has he flashed? He's of course the second-round rookie. Has he flashed in this camp?
He has. I mean, you see his raw ability. He's someone who's fairly new to the football sport. Didn't pick it up until late high school. DeMarcus Lawrence called him a pit bull. He's young pup who's super athletic, super physical, but he's learning how to rush at an NFL level, and it's different than Ole Miss. It just is. And if you give me, there's no such thing, I hope, as a keeper format where Sam Williams is someone that you stash in hopes of him producing for you in 2024. But I do believe that he's got a really high ceiling that. I mean, his speed is just naturally going to fall him into some plays, even when he's kind of learning the NFL speed. But I would probably have some reservations about him in an IDP format just because he's probably going to have more of a situational role. And so I don't expect him to be a guy who's going to rack up a whole bunch of tackles unless he's thrown into a larger role because of injuries.
Yeah, there is absolutely that kind of format, by the way. And we will stash him and see what happens in a year or two. That was my guess on him, so we shouldn't expect much this year.
Yeah, I think that's a fair instinct there.
And then I think my only other real question on this Cowboys defense is, will there be any other linebacker besides Micah Parsons who gets near full playing time, like 75% plus of the snaps in this defense?
They do a lot of dime. They're in their big nickel. It's not like you're going to have 3 linebackers on the field a whole lot unless Micah Parsons is down at defensive end, which will happen a good amount. And then you could see Leighton Vander Esch and Anthony Barr, the new addition, who I haven't even seen practice yet. He hasn't practiced since he got here because of a ramp-up program. But I think Anthony Barr, Leighton Vander Esch, these are players to kind of keep an eye on, maybe stream based on injuries. If someone's unavailable, then suddenly, they're wearing the dot and then they're going to be on the field a whole lot. But the way the Cowboys use their safeties, they're on the field a lot, as we saw with Jaron Kearse last year. So I would probably not, unless I'm in a really deep league, otherwise I don't think I would target a Cowboys linebacker not named Micah Parsons, who's a freak of nature and I would think would be one of the most valuable players in an IDP format in terms of defenders. But otherwise, yeah, I'm not sure yet as to whether or not I would go ahead and target one of those guys.
Yeah, that was my feeling on it too. And I think the only problem with Parsons is he might just be too good at too many things. If he could sit at one spot and just score there, he might even be even better than if he were switching between DN and linebacker. But he certainly carries a lot of value. Who is wearing the green dot most often? Is it Jaron Kearse?
Kearse has worn it a good amount. Yeah, they kind of, it's three guys can wear it at once, and so it goes around, and it's I think it's important in terms of, okay, if a guy's wearing a green dot, and obviously he's going to be on the field a whole lot. But in terms of all the things to watch during training camp practice, it's not something I put a ton of emphasis on. But yeah, you'll see different guys in practice where the dot and kind of cycle it around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand how that might not be the kind of thing that's a focal point too often. But I appreciate all the insight, both on offense and defense. He is the Cowboys reporter for the Dallas Morning News. You can follow him on Twitter at Gehlken NFL. It's Gehlken NFL. Michael Gehlken, thanks again for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure. My final thought, if I can.
Yeah.
My MVP at training camp is Micah Parsons. This guy, I wouldn't be scared away by his myriad roles. Like he's unlike anything I've seen. He's a freak. In terms of what he does off the edge. Even linebacker, half of his sacks came off the ball last year. He's the conversation of best NFL defenders. I realize it starts with Aaron Donald, as it should, but after that, I think it's very soon it'll be fashionable to say Micah Parsons is that high, that elite.
I agree. I mean, I headed into last season a little bit hesitant because he had the year off from football, because it wasn't exactly clear what role he was going to play. But he kind of reminded you that if somebody is just an athletic freak and a football talent freak, that you just bet on that as opposed to worrying about the minor things, and they'll get sorted out as long as the team isn't stupid with them.
Yeah, well, a lot of guys, those things that seem minor do matter. But when a guy is this unique, I think he'll be a fun player to own in IDP.
Mm-hmm. He was such a stud at Penn State too. That's like the NFL just overthought that one, letting him draft to the Cowboys. What was it, at like 14th overall or something?
Yeah.
Well, again, Michael, we really appreciate all your insight today. Thanks very much for taking the time.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
You can find every episode of the Team Insider series and all of our podcasts on the Draft Sharks YouTube channel, Apple, Spotify, wherever else you like to get your podcasts. Please subscribe, like, rate, review us on your chosen app. So you can not only get every episode, but you can help more people find us. We really appreciate you listening and helping us grow. For our guest, Michael Gehlken, for Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.